Jak X is easily one of the least talked about games in the entire Jak series. And after replaying Ratchet Deadlocked recently, it got me thinking about Jak X again. They took a platforming series known for story, exploration, and characters, and somehow turned it into a full-on combat racer. But unlike Deadlocked, Jak X feels like a game that people barely talk about anymore. So the question of this video is, was Jak X a good game? What I actually really like about Jak X's story setup is it directly calls back to Jak 2, which honestly is still one of my favorite stories in the entire trilogy. The whole crew ends up traveling to this completely new location called Crass City, which immediately made me think, where were these guys during the other two games? Because before this, it felt like the entire world was just Haven City and the Wasteland, where they eventually built Sparga City. But anyways, they start reading Crew's will. Remember this absolute unit from Jak 2, which honestly already makes no sense to me, because why would Jak even agree to be there after literally killing this dude? But of course, they all end up drinking poisoned champagne, and the only way to get the antidote is by winning the Crass City Cup for Crew. And honestly, that's a basic story setup. It's really simple. There's definitely a couple of plot holes here and there, but I honestly don't think that this game needed some massive overcomplicated story anyway. Unlike the main trilogy, this isn't a huge adventure-focused game. Jak X knows the main focus is the racing, the combat, and the overall chaos, and the story mostly just exists to keep pushing you from one event to the next. But obviously the main draw of this game is the driving. Everything is built around two core ideas: blowing things up and going as fast as possible. And when it clicks, it really clicks. You can get incredibly fast in this game, and it heavily rewards clean driving, perfectly drifting around corners, managing your speed, and keeping an eye on your boost gauge. The faster you go, the more sensitive the steering becomes, which makes the whole thing feel like a constant balancing act between control and chaos. But what really stood out to me was the combat, because it easily is one of the most unique systems I've ever seen in a kart racer. Instead of just grabbing a single item and hoping for the best, you're given a choice between 4 different pickups. Yellow is offensive, red is defensive, blue will build up your boost, and green restores your health. I really like how they tied this back to the series ecosystem, and it actually feels like it belongs in the Jak universe instead of just being random power-ups on the map. And that simple change adds a surprising amount of depth, because now it's not just about what you pick up, it's about what you need in that moment. Maybe you're low on health and you need to survive for the next few seconds, or maybe you're in first place just trying to cycle defensive items to prepare for incoming attacks. It is a really simple concept on paper, but honestly, I haven't seen many kart racers do it this way. And even as someone admittedly who doesn't usually play a lot of kart races, this system kept me way more engaged than something like, say, Mario Kart. And the AI is no joke in this game either. I didn't really notice much in the way of rubber banding, which I actually really appreciated. Instead, it feels like that kind of balancing has been replaced with a heavy reliance on weapons that are basically the equivalent of Mario Kart's blue shell, an attack that targets the person in first and most of the time is undodgeable. And personally, I'm just not a huge fan of that approach, because Jak X already has a pretty high skill ceiling. It can feel a bit frustrating when you're rewarded for driving well, only to get pulled back by what feels like a cheap catch-up mechanic. It kind of takes away from that motivation to really master the driving and push for perfect runs. But continuing on from that, the driving itself does feel really good. Boosting and sliding are both incredibly satisfying, and when you're in control, the moment-to-moment gameplay does feel fun. But my one major complaint comes down to the geometry in some of these tracks. In certain areas, the terrain just isn't smooth enough, and it can really throw you off. You can be doing everything right, holding a clean line and managing your boost, then all of a sudden you'll hit a section of uneven ground and suddenly you are just sliding all over the place. And because of that, the overall enjoyment of the driving mechanics gets a bit masked by these moments of frustration. It doesn't ruin the game, but it definitely feels like something to be aware of, because the track design can occasionally fight against you in a way that feels unfair rather than challenging. Despite this being a racing game, there's also a ton of different modes on offer here, and I rarely found myself playing the same type of event back to back. You've got traditional races, arena battles, time trials, item hunt challenges, death races, and rush hour modes. Some of these are definitely more fun than others though. The worst, in my opinion, has got to be rush hour, where you just drive headfirst into oncoming traffic and try and blow them up for points. In practice, I just found myself sliding out and crashing every few seconds. I'm not sure if it's a physics issue or just the way the mode is designed, but it ended up being the most frustrating part of the game for me. On the structure side though, there are 4 main cups in the story mode, each with its own set of cutscenes woven between the races. It's It's enough to keep you engaged and gives you a reason to keep pushing forward to see what happens next. We also have a pretty large variety of tracks to pull from across the trilogy. You've got Haven City, the Wasteland, and even the Forbidden Jungle from the first game making a return. And honestly, it all looks great when you're flying through it at high speed. Visually, I've got no real complaints here. It holds up well and it keeps things interesting as you progress. Talking about progression though, we also get a steady stream of new cars throughout the game, each with their own strengths, but in reality, it's all pretty straightforward with nothing too complex. Most vehicles fall into generally one of three categories. They're either fast but have poor handling, slow but heavily armored, or a middle ground option with decent speed and control. It works well enough, but there isn't a huge amount of depth beyond that. You can also upgrade your vehicles using precursor orbs, which is a little confusing because in the previous two Jak games, these things were considered really rare. But here you're suddenly collecting hundreds and thousands of them. It left me wondering whether it's meant to be a common currency in this game or it's still supposed to feel like something more significant. On the unlock side though, there's also special vehicles and characters you can unlock if you have save data from the other games on your memory card. This even includes Ratchet from Deadlock, which is a pretty cool crossover edition and definitely a standout reward for long-time Jak and Ratchet fans. The music is another standout part of this game as well. Jak X has a much more unique soundtrack compared to the rest of the series, leaning heavily into a rock-style score that really fits the high-energy, chaotic nature of this game. It does a really great job of building hype during races and keeping the momentum going when everything on screen is getting a bit intense. And honestly, it just makes you want to drive faster and play even more aggressively. But after spending some time with Jak X, I've got pretty mixed feelings, but definitely more positive than negative. On one hand, the core driving is genuinely fun. When it clicks, it really does click. The speed, the boosting, the drifting, it all comes together in a way that feels satisfying and skill-based. The combat system also stands out as one of the more unique takes on a kart racer, especially with how it ties into the ecosystem and gives you full control over the pickups instead of just relying on randomness. And presentation-wise, it actually holds up pretty well. The tracks pulled from across the trilogy are a great touch, and the soundtrack fits the chaos of the game perfectly. But it's not without its issues. Some of the track geometry can be frustrating, certain modes like Rush Hour feel way more annoying than fun, and the weapon-heavy AI balancing can sometimes take away from the skill expression the driving system is clearly built around. So the question is, does it still hold up? I'd say that Jak X is still worth a playthrough. It's not a perfect racer, and it definitely has some rough edges, but there's still a really solid and unique gameplay loop underneath it all. If you're a fan of the Jak series or just want a different take on a kart racer with more combat depth, it's absolutely worth experiencing at least once. And in terms of the tier list, I do think Jak X is still a really solid game. For my ranking though, I think I will put it in B tier. Still a really good game, just not as good as Jak 1, 2, and 3, or any of the other games in A or S, but still a really solid game overall. But what do you guys think? Do you love Jak X, or is it one of those games that just never really clicked for you? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.